Oh, come on now, guys. Stop it. This is a petty discussion. MG, I'm kind of surprised at you. I thought you were above these kind of arguments. They're trying to decide who's the scariest. Hello, minders out there. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. But you know, these guys, well, this one in particular, since he's been with me for 30 years, right, Reese? They've become indispensable models for me in learning how to draw and paint the human face. And I've just been itching to do that. We're going to do a sketch session on two faces. I'm going to be using the app Sketchy. I'll probably talk about that more in the video. But we're going to talk about why it's difficult, how to be more encouraged if painting and drawing portraits is something you really want to do, but you kind of been put off by how difficult it is. I hope I can kind of steer you in the right direction. And we'll just have a general discussion about doing portraits. And I'm going to be using the process I showed you a few videos back, where you sketch with a water brush, a thin one like a pencil, or you can use palette dirt or just mix up very light washes, build up your sketch that way. This was a very enjoyable session for me, and thank you so much, Reese. I just have to say, for all your help over the years and doing a better job at drawing portraits. Skull bump. Let's get into the sketching. All right, well, first let's just take a minute to talk about the process. Now, I won't go into this in detail. I have another video that I did on this particular sketching process, and I will put a link to it down in the description if you haven't seen that. I'm just using watercolor, and I'm using a very fine tip water brush like a pencil. And that's all I'll say about it. Just go see the video if you don't know what I'm talking about. Now, yes, this is a less forgiving process than using a pencil. It's just something I do to challenge myself and because I like working with watercolor, but it's got a lot of kind of neat nuances to it. I like that you can build it up from a very, very pale wash, and that's where the forgiveness is. You know, as you find your lines and your value shapes, then you just start darkening it. So that's the process. This is the guy that I'm sketching. This is from Sketchy. Sketchy is an app. It's available for iOS and for Android. It's sort of a social media where people post their pictures and you're allowed to sketch them and post your art and link it to the picture. If you want to know more about Sketchy, just go to their website. I'll put that link also down in the description. So the ground rules for me when I do these is just to have a believable, interesting structure, correct facial structure. I'm not necessarily trying for a likeness. By the way, here's the brush I'm using. I like this Derwent. It's a very fine point. I think Pentel Aquash, which is actually my favorite. I think they have a fine tip like that too, but I don't have it. There's a better look at the guy. I loved this picture because of the dynamic shadows. It's one of the reasons I chose it. I love dynamic light, and it's just really interesting to do portraits, I think. Kind of gives you something to fill your face forms and your value forms with when you have those interesting shadows. And I'm just blocking it in. Now, what I really wanted to talk about is why this is so difficult. And you can pretty much tell what I'm doing just by watching. As I start to find my lines and proportions and values, and I go from the big shapes down to the small details, then I just get the paint a little darker and a little darker. And beyond that, it's just sketching. But I really wanted to talk to you about how difficult this is in the sense of trying to encourage you. Because there's a way to approach this. And I know better than anybody because I was not a portrait painter. In fact, I stunk at it. I mean, I really did. I badly wanted to be able to do it. I actually enjoyed landscape much more back in the day. Not so much anymore. I mean, I like portraits as much as I do landscape. So I was in a position that a lot of you out there tell me you're in. You really would like to do portraits, but you just are having a very difficult time. Well, let's talk about that. Um, Portrait drawing and sketching, and by the way, it starts with sketching. You just have to take it a step at a time. Now, if that sounds like an oversimplification, just hear me out. Bear with me here. There is more to breaking down the steps of studying and understanding a face than there is something like landscape. Landscape is, by comparison, much easier because there's so much forgivability in the subject matter of landforms and tree forms and that sort of thing. Proportion is not as important, although it is important. But in portraits, you've just got to start at the beginning, and that begins with the human skull. There was a reason why I had Reese and MG there. The human skull is a diagram. Just as when you're drawing and sketching, it's just essential to start from the big and work to the small as you study, not just as you draw, but as you study. There are so many people that I've come across, I've talked to about portrait drawing and painting, who just think they've sat down, they pull up a picture of somebody, they've tried to draw it, and it just looked horrible, and they just figured they can't do it. They just can't do it. Well, there are a few people that can right off the bat, but not very many, almost none. It takes a certain type of study. You start with the big shapes, the underlying shapes. When I say the skulls are like a diagram, there are bone protrusions, the brow line, the corners of the temples just above the eyes on the outer edges of the eyes, the bridge of the nose, the chin, of course, the cheekbones, the top of the forehead, the points where the ears attach. Those are critical dimensions that you need to learn, not only front on, but in ways in which the face turns. Those of you who do portraits know what I'm talking about, and I say all this just to say it's more important in drawing the human face than in drawing just about anything else. We look at faces all day, so we're very familiar with what a face is supposed to look like. And there's that human light, personality, what I personally believe is a soul that just, if you don't have the proportions right, you can kind of tell it, But it starts with a diagram. And that's what I've always referred to the human skull as, is a diagram of where things land on the head. Sometimes it may seem that the human skull does not have or would not help you a whole lot in doing portraits, but it does. The more you draw portraits, and then the more you draw the skull and study the skull, the more you see where those points line up. The progression that I recommend, now I'm starting on the second one. This young lady had a really interesting pose, I thought. Kind of a funny, pouty, raised eyebrow expression. I didn't completely get all that expression, the nuances of it the way I wanted, but expression just kind of gets into another realm, like likeness. And that kind of brings me to a good segue, my next point. There's a progression. When you learn the basic proportions. Don't try to draw a particular person just yet. The skull is a great place to start. The spacing, the key spacings are the eyes, where the eyes hit in the head, in the center of the head, the distance at the bottom of the nose from the eyes, the distance of the bottom of the lip from the nose, and how all those are spaced out between the chin. Those are the key proportions. The planes of the head and the face, where the light hits. These are all things you have to study individually. And I realize some of you are not interested in portraits, so you probably won't have the patience to follow through with it unless you just really want to do this. But if you do really want to do this, then do it right. Study to begin with the generic proportions. the way a face breaks down for almost everybody. And of course, like anything else, the more you practice it, the more you do it, the more you get good at it, the more comfortable it becomes. Another one is, as you see me blocking in these forms, are angles. Angles are sometimes hard to visualize, and a lot of this is just seeing and training your eye to see. And when I've said this to people, a lot of people say, yeah, I know, that's the problem. I can't see it right. Well, it's a matter of measuring, finding ways to verify what you see or what you think you see. One of the biggest problems is they don't draw what they see. They draw what they think is there. They draw the symbol of an eye, the outline of what they think a mouth is, and it comes out cartoony. So you're training yourself to see. You're training yourself to see exactly what is there. And again, I iterate. You say, well, that's just all of art. You have to learn to see better. Well, it's true, but it is much more true of portraits than just about anything. You've got to train yourself to see proportions, spacing, angles. One of the things I like to do a lot to verify my proportions and what I'm drawing is I compare angles and spacing of the positive items, like that would be eyes, nose, mouth, the darker values, to negative spacing. That's like the open areas, the cheeks and the forehead. Those all have shapes, those areas. The values, the shadows have shapes. So you kind of verify what you're seeing by not only a positive shape, but a negative shape. I'll hold my drawing utensil up to a side or to a top or to the eyes to get the angle right. And these details, it can be said of almost any realistically drawn subject, especially landscape, but doubly especially portraits. Don't put details in too soon. Get the foundation of your drawing correct. And with faces, correct is everything. Correct is everything. And a lot of times you will not at the beginning be able to tell what's wrong with something. You just know it's wrong. That comes with time. Go back to the drawing board. See where the skull points line up or don't line up. Does the nose hit where it should? What about the chin? Do you have the face too long? Here's several of the most common tendencies. The eyes too high in the head. That's a real common one. It's sort of a visual trick, sort of a visual aberration. It looks like there is less room between the eyes and the top of the head than there is below. In reality, the eyes are in the center. And new students who are just trying to learn how to draw portraits very often get the eyes too high in the head. Another common tendency is the nose is too long. Very, very common. And I kind of judge that by the negative space under the eye. There's a little triangle formed under the eye and the nostrils of the nose. And when I see that getting kind of too elongated and big, I know I've got to check my proportions. Another tendency is the mouth is too low. In other words, the space between the bottom of the nose and the top lip is too long. So you get this weird looking long upper lip. That's a proportion that is often gotten wrong. So that's another sort of tip. Start to learn tendencies. And believe me, you may be frustrated that you keep making the same mistakes. If you're someone who likes to draw portraits and you just don't like what you're coming up with, but you're not alone. I mean, everybody that has drawn portraits fights these tendencies. I mean, I struggle with them. I have pages of like skulls where I don't even put in the eyes, nose, and mouth. I'm just drawing the outer shape of the head over and over again. I may put a cavity, kind of like a skull socket, where the eyes would go. And then I turn it in dimension and do it again. Yeah, I know it takes patience. But these are some of the reasons that it's so difficult, is because people think, Oh, I've got a little bit of ability. People like the stuff I've drawn. I can sit down and draw something I see and have a reasonable expectation that it'll be realistic. So I should be able to just sit down and draw a portrait, and then they find, oh, nope, that wasn't true. That was me. That was me. It was very frustrating because I thought I had some ability, and I thought, why can't I do this? This is so maddening. And it's because portraits take something more. They take something more. I take encouragement from that. And if you really want to draw a portrait, just grasp for that patience. Do the work. It will happen. You will get better. The more you break it down, the more you practice, the more you know, it will happen. By the way, a little side note, this little brush I'm using is a color brush. It's got white ink in it. I know you're going to ask what that is. I'll put a link to it. I don't necessarily recommend it. I don't like them very much. I tend to more often just get out some gouache or something. Because the process I'm using here is pretty unforgiving. I don't mind using a little white if there's just something I really feel like I need to fix. Study good books like Loomis's Drawing the Head. Learn the Loomis method. That's another form of learning the diagram of the head. Being able to draw a convincing face and a convincing facial structure is first. The broad elements, correct angles, proportions, and sizing and spacing. Second to that will be adding personality, but you really shouldn't even be attempting like expression and personality until you've mastered the first. And I think sort of graduate level portrait sketching would be a likeness. Likenesses take work. Since I'm not after a likeness, it doesn't matter. Hopefully, if I've done a fairly decent job, you'll see a bit of a likeness. But these are not portraits that I would give these people and say, here, I did your portrait. That's graduate level stuff. Okay, I hope these tips and encouragements help you to realize that portraits are hard and they're something else. They're something different than just about every other kind of art. So you have to treat them that way. You have to learn how to break them down, and that's what we've talked about. And I mean for that to be a form of encouragement. If you really want to draw portraits, don't give up on them. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to me prattle on. Here's the pieces, and this to me was a good, productive sketching session. Hope you'll give it a try. Hope you'll hang in there and not give up if it's something you really want to do. Thank you so much, patrons, for sponsorship. It means so much to me, and we will see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.